Something doesn't add up. You've noticed it, even if you can't quite name it. There's something about the way certain people, men and women alike, cling to childish ideas the way they expect the world to solve their problems. That doesn't quite make sense. And if you've personally suffered from their games, their manipulations, their eternal inability to take responsibility, then you know. Immaturity is not a phase. It's a mental prison. But before you think this is an attack, listen carefully. This isn't about them. It's about understanding. Because immaturity isn't a whim. It's a defense mechanism. It's the result of a deep-seated fear buried in the darkest corner of the psyche. A fear that philosophers and psychologists have tried to decipher for centuries. Think about it. Why do some people never manage to escape? Let's start with the basics. Immaturity isn't just about acting childish. It's about refusing to grow up. It's about clinging to a version of yourself that no longer serves you. And here's the kicker. Society rewards it. We're told it's okay to be fragile, that it's fine to seek someone to rescue us. But when reality strikes, when the world doesn't bend to our will, we're left lost, confused, and angry. This is where Carl Jung's archetypes come in. Jung believed that the human psyche evolves through stages, each represented by an archetype. For women, these archetypes include the girl, the princess, and the sorceress. For men, they might include the boy, the hero, and the king. These archetypes aren't just symbols, they're stages of maturation. But when someone gets stuck at one of these stages, immaturity takes over. Take the girl archetype, for example. She's the woman who refuses to grow up, the one who still expects someone to take care of her, protect her, pamper her. She uses her fragility as a weapon, cries instead of arguing, manipulates instead of negotiating. She's the one who never accepts that the world owes her nothing. And do you know what's most terrifying? Society reinforces this archetype. Women are told it's okay to be delicate, that it's fine to seek someone to rescue them. And so, when reality strikes, they don't know what to do. But there's another, more dangerous level, the princess. Here it's no longer just about fragility, it's about entitlement. The princess believes she deserves everything without effort. She thinks love, success, and happiness should be handed to her on a silver platter. And when life doesn't meet her expectations, she feels cheated. She gets furious. Because the princess not only refuses to grow up, she demands that the world kneel before her. And then there's the sorceress. Here, immaturity turns into power. This is the archetype of the person who has learned to play with others' minds, who uses seduction, manipulation, and chaos to avoid facing their own insecurity. The sorceress doesn't seek love. She seeks control. She enjoys seeing others trapped in her web. This is the most dangerous form of immaturity because it's no longer just a defense mechanism. It's a weapon. But here's the thing. Immaturity isn't just an individual problem. It's a symptom of something much bigger. It's the result of a society that has infantilized us for centuries. A society that has taught us that vulnerability is an advantage, that drama is normal, that someone else will always come to save us. And when we cling to our immaturity, we condemn ourselves to dependence, to an eternal search for someone to rescue us. But here's the key question. What happens to those who manage to break the cycle? The ones who dare to face their shadows, to stop playing games, to take ownership of their lives? Something curious happens. The world punishes them. Society isn't used to a mature, independent, self-aware person. They're told they're cold, harsh, that they've lost their essence. Because maturity is a threat. A person who doesn't need to be rescued is a person who cannot be controlled. So here's the brutal truth. Immaturity is comfortable. It's easy. It's socially accepted. But it's also a prison, and the only way out is to face fear, to leave the games behind, to abandon the archetypes that no longer serve us. And here comes the question that really matters. To what extent is immaturity a choice? And how many of us are truly willing to pay the price of growing up? Because at the core, there are only two paths: to keep playing or to wake up. And waking up hurts. But the alternative is far worse. The question is, how many of us truly want to wake up? If this resonates with you, If you've ever felt trapped in your own immaturity or struggled with someone else's, hit the like button, subscribe, and let's continue this conversation in the comments. Because understanding is the first step to change. And here's where we enter the darkest part of all this. Because it's not enough to talk about immaturity as a psychological or social phenomenon. It's not enough to say that it's an issue of identity or evolution. There's something deeper, something lurking behind all of this that most prefer to ignore. Immaturity is not just a state of mind. It's a poison that seeps into every decision, every relationship, every broken dream. It's the silent cause of wasted lives, lost opportunities, cycles that never close. But there's one question no one dares to ask. What happens when immaturity becomes destructive? Because it's one thing to be immature and depend on others to survive. It's another thing entirely to use immaturity as a weapon. Let's talk about immaturity as sabotage. Because at this point, we already understand that many people don't mature, because doing so would mean giving up protection, the privilege of fragility. But there's an even more dangerous group, those who don't mature because they've discovered that immaturity gives them power. This is where manipulation comes into play, because immaturity doesn't always manifest as weakness. Sometimes it disguises itself as seduction, as drama, as calculated victimhood. It's the person who cries when they don't get what they want, who throws fits when someone contradicts them, who plays with others' emotions to avoid facing their own. And the most terrifying thing is, it works. Because we live in a society that has been programmed to protect the fragile, to forgive their mistakes, to justify their immaturity with a simple, "That's just how they are." And here's where it becomes the most dangerous part. When immaturity isn't punished, it's reinforced. When someone discovers they can get what they want without effort, without growth, without responsibility, why would they change? It's easier to make others feel guilty. It's easier to play the victim card. It's easier to throw a tantrum than to admit a mistake. And meanwhile, relationships fall apart. Because no one can build anything solid with a person who refuses to grow. Romantic relationships wear out because no one can love someone who acts like a child forever. Friendships become toxic because no one can trust someone who never takes responsibility for their actions. Jobs are lost because professionalism and maturity go hand in hand. And immaturity only leads to frustration. But the worst part isn't that. The worst part is what happens when immaturity turns into resentment. Because there comes a point when the world stops rewarding it. There comes a point when people get tired, when friends walk away, when opportunities disappear. There comes a point when life collects the debt. And that's when bitterness sets in. Because immaturity cannot sustain itself forever. It's a game with an expiration date. And when that day comes, many don't know what to do. And here's where it gets even darker. Because instead of owning their part of the problem, many choose another path. The path of hatred, of revenge, of psychological warfare against a world that no longer gives them what they want. This is where people are born who despise others simply because they can't control them. Those who attack others because they remind them of what they will never be. Those who live in a perpetual state of anger, looking for someone to blame. But the truth is, there is no one else to blame. Because the problem was never the world. The problem is choosing to remain a child when it was already time to be an adult. And here comes the final question. How many of us will have the courage to admit it? But let's take a step back and ask, why does society reward immaturity? Why do we celebrate fragility in some and excuse irresponsibility in others? The answer lies in the stories we've been told for centuries. Stories that paint women as delicate flowers in need of protection, and men as stoic heroes who must shoulder the weight of the world. These narratives aren't just outdated, they're destructive. They trap us in roles that no longer serve us, roles that keep us from growing into our full potential. Think about it. From a young age, girls are taught to be sweet, polite, and accommodating. They're praised for their innocence and shielded from the harsh realities of the world. Boys, on the other hand, are told to be strong, independent, and unemotional. They're discouraged from showing vulnerability, from asking for help, from admitting they don't have all the answers. These messages shape us, but they also limit us. They create a world where immaturity is not just accepted, it's expected. And here's the irony. While society claims to value maturity, It often punishes those who embody it. A woman who speaks her mind is labeled bossy or difficult. A man who shows emotion is called weak or unmanly. We're caught in a double bind, pressured to grow up but punished when we do. Is it any wonder, then, that so many of us cling to immaturity? That we retreat into the safety of childhood rather than face the challenges of adulthood? But immaturity isn't just a product of modern society. Its roots run much deeper, all the way back to our evolutionary past. For most of human history, survival depended on fitting into specific roles. Women needed protection to ensure the survival of their children, while men needed to prove their strength to secure resources and status. Immaturity, in this context, wasn't a flaw. It was a survival strategy. A woman who appeared fragile and helpless was more likely to attract a protector. A man who avoided vulnerability was more likely to succeed in a competitive world. These traits were passed down through generations, ingrained in our DNA. But here's the problem. The world has changed. We no longer live in tribes or rely on brute strength for survival. Yet our mental software remains the same. We're still running programs designed for a world that no longer exists. And so, we find ourselves trapped in a paradox. We cling to behaviors that once ensured our survival but now hold us back. We play roles that no longer serve us, roles that keep us from evolving. The question is, how do we break free? How do we rewrite the scripts that have been written for us? The cost of immaturity is steep. It's not just a personal burden, it's a collective one. Immaturity erodes trust, destroys relationships, and stifles growth. It's the reason so many marriages end in divorce, so many friendships fall apart, so many careers stagnate. It's the silent force behind the cycles of dysfunction that plague our lives. Think about the last time you dealt with an immature person. Maybe it was a partner who refused to take responsibility for their actions. Maybe it was a friend who always played the victim. Maybe it was a colleague who couldn't handle criticism. Whatever the case, you likely felt frustrated, drained, even resentful. Because immaturity doesn't just hurt the person who embodies it, it hurts everyone around them. And here's the hardest truth. Immaturity is contagious. When we surround ourselves with immature people, we're more likely to adopt their behaviors. We start making excuses for them, enabling their dysfunction, even mirroring their flaws. It's a vicious cycle, one that's hard to break. But break it we must, because the alternative is a life of stagnation, a life devoid of true connection and growth. So how do we break free from immaturity? How do we step into our power and embrace the responsibility of adulthood? The answer lies in self-awareness. It lies in the willingness to confront our shadows, to face the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. It's not an easy path, but it's the only one that leads to true freedom. The first step is to take responsibility. Responsibility for our actions, our emotions, our lives. This means owning our mistakes, apologizing when we're wrong, and making amends when we've hurt others. It means recognizing that we are the authors of our own stories, that no one else can save us or fix us. The second step is to let go of the need for approval. Immaturity thrives on external validation. It's the reason we play roles, wear masks, and seek rescue. But true maturity comes from within. It comes from knowing who we are and standing firm in that knowledge, even when the world tries to knock us down. The third step is to embrace discomfort. Growth is never easy. It requires us to face our fears, to step into the unknown, to challenge the status quo. But it's in these moments of discomfort that we find our strength, our resilience, our true selves. And what awaits us on the other side of maturity? A life of depth, meaning, and connection. A life where we no longer need to play games or wear masks. A life where we can show up as our authentic selves, flaws and all. Mature relationships are built on trust, respect, and mutual growth. They're not perfect, but they're real. They're the kind of relationships that withstand the test of time, that grow stronger with each challenge. Mature careers are marked by purpose and passion. They're not just about climbing the ladder or chasing success. They're about making a difference, about using our talents to contribute to something greater than ourselves. And mature individuals? They're the ones who inspire us. The ones who show us what's possible when we dare to grow up, when we dare to take ownership of our lives. They're the ones who remind us that maturity isn't a burden, it's a gift. Let's bring this down to earth. Immaturity isn't just an abstract concept. It's something we see every day. Take relationships, for example. How many times have you seen a partner refuse to apologize, even when they're clearly in the wrong? How many times have you witnessed someone play the victim, twisting the narrative to avoid accountability? These aren't just minor flaws. They're signs of a deeper immaturity, a refusal to grow up. Or consider the workplace. How many times have you dealt with a colleague who couldn't handle criticism, who threw a tantrum when things didn't go their way? How many times have you seen someone take credit for others' work, or blame everyone but themselves for their failures? These behaviors aren't just frustrating, they're toxic. They create a culture of distrust and resentment, one that stifles creativity and progress. And then there's social media, the ultimate playground for immaturity. How many times have you seen someone post a passive-aggressive comment or start a fight over something trivial? How many times have you witnessed people seeking validation through likes and comments or using their platforms to manipulate and control others? Social media amplifies immaturity, giving it a global stage and an endless audience. Now, some might argue that immaturity isn't always a bad thing, that it's a natural part of being human, a way to cope with the pressures of life. And to some extent, they're right. We all have moments of immaturity, moments when we fall back on old habits or seek comfort in familiar roles. But there's a difference between occasional lapses and a pattern of behavior, a difference between being human and refusing to grow. Others might say that immaturity is a product of trauma, that it's a way to protect ourselves from pain. And again, there's truth in this. Many of us carry wounds from our past, wounds that shape how we see the world and interact with others. But healing requires us to face those wounds, to acknowledge them and work through them. It requires us to take responsibility for our own growth, rather than using our pain as an excuse to stay stuck. The point isn't to judge or condemn, it's to understand. To recognize that immaturity, while understandable, is ultimately a barrier to our growth. A barrier that we must confront if we want to live fulfilling, authentic lives. Philosophers have long grappled with the concept of immaturity. Carl Jung saw it as a failure to integrate the shadow, to confront the darker aspects of ourselves. Friedrich Nietzsche viewed it as a refusal to embrace life's challenges, to say yes to the difficult and the unknown. Simone de Beauvoir argued that immaturity is a form of bad faith, a way of avoiding the responsibility of freedom. These thinkers remind us that maturity isn't just about age or experience. It's about courage, the courage to face our fears, to embrace our flaws, to take ownership of our lives. It's about stepping into the unknown, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's terrifying. And perhaps most importantly, it's about recognizing that we are not fixed entities. We are works in progress, constantly evolving, constantly growing. Immaturity is a choice, but so is maturity. The question is, which will we choose? But individual growth isn't enough. If we want to create a world where maturity is valued, we need societal change. We need to challenge the narratives that reward immaturity, that glorify fragility and entitlement. We need to create systems that support growth, that encourage responsibility and accountability. This starts with education. We need to teach our children not just how to succeed, but how to grow, how to take responsibility for their actions, how to handle failure, how to navigate the complexities of life. We need to model maturity for them, to show them what it looks like to face challenges with courage and grace. It also requires a cultural shift. We need to stop glorifying immaturity in our media, our politics, our social norms. We need to celebrate those who embody maturity, who show us what's possible when we dare to grow up. And we need to hold each other accountable, to call out immaturity when we see it, not with judgment, but with compassion and a desire for growth. So here's the challenge. Dare to grow up. Dare to face your shadows, to take responsibility for your life, to embrace the discomfort of growth. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Because on the other side of immaturity is a life of depth, meaning, and connection. A life where you can show up as your authentic self, flaws and all. And if this resonates with you, If you've ever felt trapped in your own immaturity or struggled with someone else's, hit the like button, subscribe, and let's continue this conversation in the comments. Because understanding is the first step to change. And change starts with us. The choice is yours. Grow up or stay trapped. The world is waiting.